China has been releasing figures which are totally unbelievable in terms of the numbers of deaths, just 25 or so in December. Yesterday marked a big change that we did get these figures from China, but even now they're widely regarded as being a significant underestimate.
Just weeks ago, the Chinese Premier Xi Jinping appeared to be pretty invincible. But is that changing? China's sudden about face on its COVID zero policy is prompting speculation about his leadership. It comes as the notoriously secretive country reported 60,000 COVID related deaths in just over a month, but that figure is widely believed to be quite a drastic underestimate. Ian Williams was NBC's Beijing correspondent and is author of Fire of the Dragon, China's New Cold War. Ian, good morning.
Good morning, Callum.
It's really good to speak to you. I suppose let's start with the difficulty actually in understanding the scale of the COVID crisis looking in from here. Is there any sort of understanding within China of how to deal with the pandemic and how to collect accurate data and indeed release that accurate data?
Well, I think the about face on zero COVID, which was this policy whereby they wanted to totally eliminate the virus, has been so screeching. It's not so much a shifting gear as a screeching handbrake term that it's come as a bit of a shock to the entire system. And you've seen protests just in this last week at factories which were making test kit, and also these these men in white, the army of enforcers of zero COVID, who suddenly found themselves out of a job. So I think there's been a real sense of shell shock across China because of the screeching change in policy. Now, part of the issue with the difficulty collecting data is because the testing has stopped, but it's also because the Communist Party is notoriously secretive. And having for 3 years said they were going to eliminate the virus, there's Xi Jinping presenting himself as the commander in chief of the people's war against the virus. Suddenly, we've had this abrupt about face, and China has been releasing figures which are totally unbelievable in terms of the numbers of deaths, just 25 or so in December. Yesterday marked a big change that we did get these figures from China, but even now they're widely regarded as being a significant underestimate.
What does China gain from doing that, from releasing figures that are not accurate?
I think part of it is deeply ingrained in the Communist Party DNA. It's a very secretive organization. It's a very opaque organization, and transparency is not in the genes. So you've got a problem there straight away. We saw this when the virus first emerged in Wuhan last year, that secrecy is part of the way the Communist Party operates. There's also a sense that it doesn't believe that this is any of the business of the outside world. There's a lot of xenophobia here. There was a sense that the way China was tackling the virus until very recently, zero COVID, was a demonstration of the superiority of the Chinese system. So there is probably a degree of embarrassment as well about this sudden surge, this massive wave, a tsunami, it's being described on social media in China, which is now sweeping across the country. And even though organizations like the World Health Organization, the British government, the US government has been urging China to be more transparent and more open, it has been extremely reluctant to do that until the figures we saw yesterday.
Yeah, in your brilliantly analytical piece in the Times today and online as well at times.co.uk, Ian, you highlight actually other policies too that are being abandoned in a similar way to the zero COVID policy. What are those other policies, and just explain the significance of these U-turns?
Well, the significance lies in, as you mentioned earlier, the fact that Xi Jinping had seemed impregnable. He'd seemed at the height of his powers. But of course, historians will tell you that in China, it's often when you're at the height of your power that you're most vulnerable, that it becomes most dangerous for you. Now, there are a host of different policies that he has made his own over the years. He's been cracking down on high-tech companies seeking to exert more party control. He's been pushing something called common prosperity, which is really just a buzz phrase meaning more state control. He's been trying to rein in a property bubble, which has been slowly bursting and causing enormous problems for the economy because property is such a big proportion of it. Now, all these policies have been abruptly overturned or appear to have been in recent days. Suddenly, common prosperity is gone. Suddenly, there are cuddly words towards tech companies. Suddenly, they want to reinflate the property bubble. Now, this has got all sorts of tongues wagging about how damaged Xi Jinping's premiership, his leadership has become. Here was he, the supreme leader, who seemed to have no opponents, suddenly abandoning, not just abandoning, but turning on their head policies which have been fundamental to his rule. And I think my conclusion, and that of a lot of China watchers, is that he's been seriously damaged. His credibility has been seriously dented by the about face over zero COVID. And we are now seeing his hand being forced into the abandonment of what were key policies.
Mm. Can you identify, Ian, perhaps an upcoming flashpoint where Xi Jinping, where it will reach a point of no return for him? Frankly, is that the feeling that you're getting, that actually he will be ousted at some stage?
Well, Chinese politics is very opaque.
Mm.
Somebody once said to me, anybody who claims to understand the Chinese Communist Party is misinformed. And there's a certain amount, but people I've been speaking to have been saying that we should look out for volatility in decision making.
Mm.
We should look out for a lack of coherence. We should look out for expect the unexpected. Now, there's no doubt that Xi Jinping has made a lot of enemies within the system. And one line of thought is being that he's being gently pushed to one side. He's being allowed to keep his titles, to keep his nominal positions, but is being stripped of a certain amount of that power. Now, whether or not that will sit comfortably with Xi, and whether he will attempt to push back in a manner whereby the power struggle becomes more apparent to the outside world. Either way, I think the next few weeks are going to be fascinating in terms of what we see coming out of China.
Really, really interesting. Ian, it's so good to speak to you this morning, and your piece in the Sunday Times is absolutely brilliant today as well. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us.